Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where we discuss relevant information concerning the cybersecurity workforce, business development, and best practices, made possible by CMIS. Learn more at cmis.net. And for a list of authorized publications, visit DewayneHart.com. And now, here's your host, Dewayne Hart.
Hello, everyone. We're back again for season 2. I am excited. I was able to launch my book, but outside of launching the cybersecurity mindset, I was able to prepare for season 2 of the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast. So I always like to start off and say that cybersecurity is always around us. If you sit back as a listener and you think about your quality of life, okay, think about every day when you wake up and you're able to have lights, you're able to have water, you're able to have other things such as transportation, right? Imagine one day you wake up and those services was not available. How would you feel? You'll be like, oh, I can't get across town. I can't get no gas. Water's not available. I don't have lights. So your quality of life would diminish. Now, cybersecurity plays a role in your quality of life. So just bear with me for a second here, and I'm going to lead you directly into the discussion, because there's a topic called critical infrastructure protection. Now, I'm pretty sure many people have heard that term before, all right? And critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity is the topic of discussion. But what I am going to do today is to deep dive into critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity, and to show you how they correlate, looking at the government position, looking at some of the risks, looking at some of the improvements that needs to happen, and just overall bringing it to light. Because about 30 years ago, or maybe 40, we were not so much concerned about critical infrastructure because most of the utility plants were not really IT based. Okay. So it's become a very, very critical now. Because when you think about the machinery area, which is what, most of the critical infrastructure operates off of, they were not really IT-based type of machines. So today, IT has played a strong role in critical infrastructure. So let's just move on and talk about critical infrastructure. Now, what I want to do first is to deep dive into a definition of critical infrastructure. There are 16 sectors involved with critical infrastructure, and I'm going to name a few here. You have your energy, you have transportation, your water and your wastewater systems, nuclear reactors, all your communications, and your dams. Those are some of the parts of your critical infrastructure. Okay. Now, keep in mind that there are 16 sectors. So as I go through here, I'm going to be pointing out some of those sectors. But if you're interested in really knowing what all those sectors fall, you can go to the DHS webpage and you can type in critical infrastructure, and there's a list of all those different sectors. So critical infrastructure protection comes with 3 words. Critical means something that is most important, is deemed to be essential to the effective function of society. As I stated before, you wake up one day and you don't have power. So it's critical that those services stay in place because they affect your quality of life. Infrastructure is the foundation. It is the physical and organizational structures and all your facilities that you have in place. All right. Think about the dams. Think about the water plants. Those are infrastructures. Protection is that shield. So you imagine having a utility plant. and you have this imaginary shield that you put around the utility plant. And what's supposed to happen is that shield is cybersecurity, and it's supposed to prevent unauthorized people from having access, prevent infiltration, prevent disasters, and also, too, to make sure services are always available. Because in cybersecurity, we always talk about availability because systems have to stay online. So in that particular circle, which is that bubble, you have different services located on the inside of that. And that's where protection comes to play. Because you're going to hear me speak a lot in season 2 about increasing protection and lowering risk, because those are outputs that actually make cybersecurity programs operate. And that's the premises of cybersecurity. And I'll say it again, increase protection and lower risk. All right. If that is achieved, then that's when you can have enterprise to operate safely. So with protection, there come ways of making it work. One of the ways is that upgraded systems, all right, because you have to upgrade systems so that they operate and so that you can increase your protection. How you respond to incidents, okay, so that's another part of your protection standard. On the inside of that, there's something called your supervisory control and data acquisition system, or SCADA system. These are systems that are designed to work around critical infrastructure systems as well, because you think about a utility plant, right? And there are certain type of remote controls that you have in place, and there are certain software programs that you use. And at a processing plant, there's different type of machinery there, and there's something called a remote terminal. You have human machine interface and programmable logic controllers, which is nothing but a logic computer. And these are the areas that are really hacked into the most. And so when you look at the SCADA system, the SCADA system is a supervisory system because someone is controlling how much power is distributed to a certain zone. Now, speaking of power, also water as well. And also to think about the nuclear power plants, right? Unlike traditional energy systems, most of the critical infrastructure system work entirely different. Look at a familiar term which you call grid power, right? Grid power means that it share and distribute the power load. So if you imagine you have 3 zones, and zone 1 uses 100 kilowatt of power, zone 2 uses 200 kilowatt of power, and zone 3 uses 300 kilowatt of power. All right. Now, on a given day, maybe in zone A, you only need 50 kilowatt of power. And also in zone 2, you need more power, which is 50 more kilowatts. So you can distribute the load. And this is controlled through a power grid, and it's the distribution of power. Now, think about a hacker, though. All right, if you're sitting there and knowing that in your neighborhood, right, you need 50 kilowatt of power, but some hacker has infiltrated the system, and now what happens is you can't get that power. All right, so these are some of the things to think about, because even so with the nuclear power plants, they fell under this umbrella as well. If you imagine if a nuclear power plant was hacked into, some of the disaster that could occur. But there's been some continual growth, and there's been some maturity with these plants as well, too, because a lot of the software programs have been upgraded, and also, too, a lot of the systems have been upgraded to a much more modern architect. Now, there are some key players that actually play a role into making sure that critical infrastructure and cybersecurity operate. Okay, those key players always and always and always take the lead. Okay. So I always like to reference chapter 14 of the cybersecurity mindset, where it states responsible action and ownership. Before any of this started to happen with critical infrastructure, somebody had to take ownership, all right? When it started to deem to be a problem. The government stepped in and started to really do some intervention and also fund a lot of the private utility plants and so forth, because a lot of that infrastructure was old and a lot of that infrastructure was like having problems. So as I go down through my podcast session here, you're going to see some of the interventions. You're going to see some of the key players. And also, too, you're going to be able to understand how the government played a key role in the critical infrastructure in cybersecurity. Now, I remember when I was doing my research and formulating my talking points for this podcast, I said to myself, I said, wow, critical infrastructure. I wonder what is critical infrastructure all about? Then I kind of thought about the cybersecurity mindset. I said, okay, then I see that word protection on the end. Okay. So there needs to be some safeguards in place to make sure that most of the sectors are protected. And as wise, the government has made some great strides in helping the country out. But let's just talk about the government, because the government has that intervention into critical infrastructure. So we're going to go through a timeline here. Back there in May of 1998, President Bill Clinton issued the PDD-633, which is the presidential directive, right? Where it documented parts of the national infrastructure, and also, too, it outlined how to protect critical infrastructures. So as you see, there was some visibility back in 1998 and looking at the importance of critical infrastructure protection. Then in 2006, the government formulated the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, okay? And it detailed how government agencies and private sector should work together. All right. This is going into the cybersecurity mindset as well, and talk about information sharing, all right? Think about having that inclusive culture, all right? Having a culture where people can work together, all right? Where you have individuals that say, okay, I know I'm the public sector, I know you're the private sector, but you know what? We all are affected. And this is what that cybersecurity mindset is coming to form. Going back to 2013, President Obama signed an executive order to improve critical infrastructure security. I remember reading that article, or the write-up about it, and I did some research prior to writing the cybersecurity mindset, and I went through it and read it, and I was like, wow, I can see now that the term increased protection and lower risk is coming to form. And looking at the critical infrastructure, it models along the same concept. So going and looking back into 2018, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was formed. All right. CISA is at the center of this now. CISA job, or you can call it CISA, job is to protect the infrastructure of the company. Okay. May it be cybersecurity, may it be physical threats, may it be any other type of threats for the infrastructure. So what CISA does is to lay that framework out and help the community understand critical infrastructure and serve as a guidance, because there are utility plants, there are different other sectors out there, such as water plants. There are also surgical systems, meaning that there are robots that perform surgery. So if you imagine if that infrastructure was infiltrated during surgeries, see, like all of this is very, very important, all right, because it serves use for us. Now, if we keep on going down and looking at this, there's a risk management framework called NERC, right, which set the standard on the type of auditing and risk management initiatives that should be in place so that these systems can stay protected. Now, NERC requires a strong partnership. And the reason that you need a very strong partnership is because, all right, you want to have a strong hacker's hat because you want to defeat hackers. Because if we are in lane A, right, and if we have hackers that are in lane B, we want to make it to the finish line before the hackers do. All right. And this is where that proactive mindset comes to play. So as you can see here, the government has been very proactive in trying to accelerate the protection for these critical infrastructure. Okay. So let's move on here and let's go talk about the cybersecurity connection here. But we want to start off by looking at some of the major risks that occur with these systems. Now these major risks that you have operational risks, you got safety risks, you have environmental risks, fires, explosion, equipment damage, financial risk, and national security risk. So operational risk is everyday activity that goes on with those type of systems, to make sure that they stay up and operate. Safety risk is making sure that the systems are safe, that they don't cause any physical or like human damage. And then the environmental risk is like from weathers and storms and so forth, right? And flooding. Fires, as a fire, then you have the financial risk too that comes along because it costs money once you have one of the major attacks, such as ransomware. All right, so we're going to talk about ransomware here shortly. Now, risks, your supply chain. When I speak about the supply chain, it is about the vendors that supply equipment, data, information, and software program for the critical infrastructures. All right. Imagine have to purchase a piece of equipment from a vendor and that equipment is not critical infrastructure ready. All right. And there are different weaknesses, gaps, and that equipment can be reverse engineered easy. All right. So if that is a case, then this is why a lot of the utility plants and so forth have to come up with a certain standard. Because if you don't have a standard, right, people or organizations can go do things in their own fashion. So you have a different type of a risk to deal with at every level. But just imagine that if it's a standard set in place and you can curve a lot of the risk because our premises is to increase protection, lower risk. Think about software programs because software programs come with millions of defects and bugs. And so you have to make sure that those software programs are regularly checked. Now, I want to bring into discussion that some of the normal practices that we have with normal IT systems, some of those same practices can be migrated over to critical infrastructures as well. One of those is like downtime, okay? We have systems that cannot go down, and they always have to be up. All of these utility plants has to stay up because the availability has to be at 99%, and that's where your resilience comes to play, all right? In the written discussion about the cybersecurity mindset, I created a conceptual model. And I'm going to be present that on my book webpage in a couple of weeks here. And in that conceptual model, I actually have a diagram that actually talks about availability and resilience. Okay. And, once you put those in place, then you can remediate changes. All right. So when you think about downtime, that is very important. Is to have that resilience and have that availability in place. Some of the other problems too that you would probably have is that a lot of these systems that you have in place, they cannot be patched and scanned on a regular basis because, the system has to stay online. because if you work in any type of vulnerability management program, because you know that these operating systems and software program come with some vulnerabilities, so you have to scan them on a regular basis so that you can identify those vulnerabilities. But a lot of systems and a lot of organizations say they refuse to have that done. So you imagine how many vulnerabilities that you may have and risks that you have in place because you was not able to scan those devices. All right, now there are some alternatives that are available. If a vendor sends you information and tell you that you need to patch something, then you can take on board that and you can probably patch it. I've always thought that you need to have some level of redundancy in place, so that if so that system A was to go offline, okay, well, you can patch and fix system A. But if system B is offline, then you can go to system A and you can bring system A up. Okay, so that's that level of redundancy that you need to have in place. There's a term called operational technologies, which is used for critical infrastructure, and it's similar, and it's really IT systems. Okay, and they call it operational technology because these systems are always up and operating all the time. All right, so operational risk involves operational downtime and the ability to perform the company's mission. All right, that is the difference between regular IT and the operational technology is that those systems has to stay up. Because if you imagine if you have a utility line that is like 50 miles away from a distribution center and it sits out in the middle of a field, there is equipment out there. Okay, now the problem is, how do you get to that equipment? And are people going out there on a regular basis and checking out that equipment? Now, this is a challenge for critical infrastructure, and there are some leads being taken now to figure out how do you really work on those systems, because some of those systems are wireless. Let's go talk about ransomware. Ransomware is probably at the top of the list for all critical infrastructure systems, and the reason why it is at the list because this is where hackers try to make money. If you think about the Colonial Pipeline, think about how it made our lives a little bit more challenging for about a week or so. All right, because there were certain gas stations that could not supply the public with gas. There was lines, all right, because of a ransomware attack. Okay, because ransomware itself is set up where hackers will set up a virus in a system, and it locks the system down. And the only way to get that system to operate is that the enterprise have to probably give some money away. All right. Now, the only way to defeat that is to have strong protection in place. Ransomware is a very critical attack that could cause a lot of these plants to go down. But the country is making great strides on getting better at managing a lot of the ransomware attacks. So what is required to actually improve critical infrastructure protection? Here's what we need to have in place. Okay. First of all, information sharing. If you go to Chapter 9 of the Cybersecurity Mindset, it talks about that. Chapter 17, modernizing cybersecurity. This means that a lot of the older ways of operating these systems and some of the technologies needs to be improved. And also, too, trying to improve the way that organizations work together because of the partnership concept. Chapter 19, the hacker's hat, being proactive, thinking about how hackers think. What is a hacker thinking about when it comes to these plants? All right. One of the other areas that need to be worked on is unifying state cybersecurity protocols, because every state has their own regulations. Imagine if every state follows the same policies and regulations. Threat intel. Okay. Threat intel is very important because that is the intelligence information that's going to tell us all the different threats and some of the schemes that hackers are doing and some of the problems that may face a lot of these infrastructures. Asset identification at the remote location. I tapped on that because you got these locations that are 50 miles away, and there's assets like wireless devices out there that are never touched, and they've been sitting out there for 2, maybe 3 years. Cyber education and workforce development is very important because everyone needs to learn a lot about critical infrastructure, but it goes beyond just having the certification and training, but also too looking at it from a operational perspective and having different teams to work together. Proactive security and thinking holistically. Yeah, thinking ahead, managing risks, and also too, you want to enhance the security. Yes, because you want to increase protection and lower risks. And I spoke about resilience too. These are some of the things that are required to improve critical infrastructure protection. If you go to Chapter 9, Chapter 17, and Chapter 19 of the Cybersecurity Mindset, those are going to focus on some of the concepts that can be used for critical infrastructure protection. As far as the framework, NIST and CISA are talking about a framework now. Much of that is going to be coming up. Password and remediation, access control is one of the other topics that is being formalized. Now, the takeaway from this podcast, I've always liked to look at modernizing cybersecurity, okay, because of digital modernization. When you think about digital modernization, it is about transforming the way we think, transforming cybersecurity to a level where you can increase that protection and you can lower the risk. All right. And digital modernization talks about trying to improve a lot of software programs, applications, data, and, the overall approach to cybersecurity. All right. If you go and think about over the past 5 to 6 years, there's been a lot of talk about digital modernization. There's been some talk about artificial intelligence, right? And how artificial intelligence can be used in this form of cybersecurity. Now, digital modernization itself has brought cloud services up. And cloud itself has been the talk of the town. Everyone that is listening to the podcast probably heard the word cloud before and wonder, what is cloud security is really about? Okay. Do I need to go outside and look? Cloud. What is cloud security about? Well, you know what? We all are in this phase of the cybersecurity mindset. So in the next episode, I'm going to focus on cloud security. All right. So I will see everybody in the next episode. And you keep in mind that you are only as safe as your mindset.
You've been listening to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where you have gained relevant knowledge to enhance your cybersecurity mindset. Be sure to visit DewayneHart.com to learn more about authored publications, show notes, and discover more information concerning cybersecurity.